Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the world, Cellarcast, episode 73. Today, I was on a walk and I got these long nails. You might have seen them in my video. Actually, have you? I don't know if they ever appear really in my videos, if I really hold up my hands, but I got long nails, and I scratched myself today. Just scratched the middle of my index finger on the top. Just a really light, like micrometer deep little cut. And like it was like bleeding a little bit, but it's like, yeah, it's gonna heal in 10 minutes. And I actually decided, because it's gonna heal so fast, why don't I just watch it heal? That would be neat, because when you get like a teeny tiny little cut like that, and you look at it 10 minutes later and it looks like it was never there. That's what I decided. I was like, well, if it's happening so fast, might as well could I see what it looks like? And so I just kind of like sat down when I got inside. I was almost in the house when it happened. So I was like, I'll just like sit down and just look at my finger for like 10 minutes. And it's really weird, because it just kind of happens. There's like this, the blood kind of stops, and then there's that red coloration from where it's around the wound, and then it kind of like lightens up, and it's so weird. It was weird because I could tell that it had changed, but I couldn't tell it had changed until after it had already changed, where the skin had already healed back. It was really odd. It was like I can't think of anything else exactly like it. I was just watching my skin grow back, just this tiny little fleck of skin come back. That was probably the most interesting thing I did today. The rest of the day I just spent sleeping. I'm recording this at like 11. I woke up at like 7. Quick little rhyme. Oh god, I gotta sneeze. No, I don't. So I have completely messed up my sleep schedule. Hopefully I can get it back on track by the time that I don't know, need to wake up for something. But hey, here we are. We're living large. So there's a couple stories I wanted to get into today. One really heavy one that's pretty serious, and some other stuff that I would not describe as being quite as heavy. Let's start off with a fun one. It was the Game Informer Street Fighter 6 coverage. I remember I used to get Game Informer like every month, because I think my mom accidentally signed up to it one time at a GameStop, and I liked them, so I actually do have. I think, yeah, if you go back and watch the Girls of Gaming episode, I have well, I think I just pulled out one, but I had like a big stack of them from over the years, and so I've always kind of had a soft spot for Game Informer. Like I always loved their covers. They always had like sometimes it would just be, here's a render from the game, but a lot of times they would get some nice artwork for the cover story. And this is another case where they got a nice. It was very. I guess the main selling point of this cover story was they were delving into Ken's development in 6, and so there was just a cool kind of, that sort of, not quite painterly, but sort of graffiti style, but really dark and muted cover of Ken. I liked it a lot. So there was a couple things that they went into. The Ken stuff is a lot of it was stuff that I just kind of feel like most people just sort of figured, but it was one part of multiple multiple things from their coverage. There is one funny bit from this article on the preview of Ken's new look. Excuse me. Or how do they describe it? A deep dive into Ken's new look from the Street Fighter 6 preview. That's what it was. So, they're talking about... I remember when the design first went out, people were like, oh, what did they do to Ken? And I was never worried because... that, like, okay, I completely understood once, because, like, honestly, I think you can go back and hear my original reaction to the roster leak. I thought Ken just looked like a dad. I just thought he looked like a dad on a Sunday, and he didn't want to get dressed or shave. He didn't strike me quite so much as the hobo Ken, she took the kids Ken, that a lot of people interpreted that as. So, a lot of, I guess they were more right than I was, because yes, he is going through something, but that wasn't it. It wasn't, he hasn't lost the kid. There was that fake leak about how, like, his son is in the army or something. It's like, his son shouldn't even be, like, a teenager by now. I don't know what that is. But once it became more apparent that they were Ken was going through, he was having a bruh moment. More than a moment, honestly. More like a bruh season. I was really not concerned at all. Because I was like, I understood immediately. I was like, okay, Ken hasn't really had anything to do in a Street Fighter game since, like, Alpha. Like, he got married, and, like, or 2, I guess. Does he get married in 2? I forget which one that happens. The point is, it's been a long time, and they haven't come up with anything for him to do besides, he's started a company. Okay, that's a development, but it's not really like any kind of conflict, There's all these other characters having these crazy conflicts, and then Ken, who's like a marquee character of the story, or of the franchise, Guile's got this whole thing with Charlie and Bison, and Ryu's got this whole thing with the Kuma and the evil energy, and Chun-Li becomes a fucking cop and shit. And she, what does Chun-Li even do? Oh, honestly, a lot of characters get wasted in Street Fighter V's story, but Ken hasn't had like a conflict in a while. So I was like, okay, they're gonna give him something to go through, and then at the end he's gonna have a big comeback moment, and it's gonna be cool. The only thing, like, in writing, the putting a character through a conflict like that is just a setup. Unless they're gonna just really wallow in some misery porn. And it's just like, fuck, he's fucked. Ken fucking fills the bath and grabs the toaster at the end. Unless it's that, which I highly doubt. It's just a setup for them to have a big comeback moment and have a big triumphant, like, fuck yeah. It's just gonna be a setup for them to have a cool moment. So I wasn't worried at all. And then when more details came out, I was like, okay, I'm not... It'll be... Maybe he's not quite as disheveled or on hard times when it was like, he's been framed or something. So there's this, like, funny bit from the article, because everyone knows, like, okay, it seems like he got framed for something. So they don't say it specifically on the website. They just said, like, accused of a crime or something like that, or like when accusations about him come out or something. So it's like, okay, they don't call it, they don't say he did it, they just say he was accused of it, which basically means that it's false. And like, okay, it's a perfect setup for a character to go on some kind of a journey and, still keep their you know, I doubt it's gonna come out that Ken was like using child labor or something like that. He's still gonna be a cool guy. He's just has to beat the accusations. And there's this funny moment in this article where the heck was it? Despite the various hints dropped during my time at Capcom, the studio remains tight-lipped on the specific narrative reasons Ken is in this perilous state. Quote, for players who start up Street Fighter VI, they can expect that Ken is now on the run from something, and he is not able to see his son Mel for unknown reasons, Nakayama says. He's in a tough situation that you'll learn more about in the future. And then you scroll down a little bit, and it's literally a screenshot from the arcade mode of Ken being arrested, and it's like news footage that says, who's behind the terrorist bombing? Questions surrounding the champ. Like, fuck, oh boy. I wonder what the reasons are going to be. I wonder what the plot is going to be for Ken in this story. There was a terrorist bombing, and there is a link to, or he gets framed for it. No, that would never be it. Like, really? Why are you acting so coy about this? You just showed. I also love that it's like, it isn't like, I was expecting something like, oh, something was stolen or some kind of embezzlement or some kind of a white collar crime. They just go with straight up terrorism. Just like fucking just straight up domestic terrorism. Months after their own president got shot to death on the street. I'm sorry, Shinzo Abe's ghost. Dude, it would be so funny. Oh, I hope that the reason Ken gets arrested is because Reddit linked him to the bombing. I hope that's what it was. I hope we get we did it, Reddit. What would be like the in-universe? They couldn't use Reddit. They would have to, what would it, Reddit is like, I read it. Besides reading. Oh, said it. I said it. We did it, said it. That would be so funny. I hope that's what it was. I hope it was some fucking... Actually, the story, if you don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, back in... What year was it? Was it 2012? The Boston Marathon bombings happened. So there was some domestic terror incident in Boston where some bombs went off, and no one knew who was responsible, and there was a subreddit created to try and deduce who it was based off of surveillance camera footage and all that, and like, okay, where were the bombs? What are the details that we know? And a lot of it, to be fair, there's a good video by the YouTuber, I think it was Wavy Web Surf. He has a great channel on things kind of like this sort of historical internet things, like weird internet history stuff. He does a lot of videos on that, and he did one on this incident, and basically what happened was that on this subreddit there weren't so many people actually making accusations of people who did it. There were like rumors and theories, and people were actually surprisingly restrained. And then what happened was that supposedly credible journalists from like actual news publications wanted to get ahead of the story. I think it started with like one of those like National Enquirer or just those fucking, rags type of publications. They wanted to get ahead of the story before anyone else, because that's, in the case of a horrible terrorist bombing where like real people died and were injured at what was supposed to be a fun event, What you really want to do is you want to get the get the scoop. Don't wait for information. Don't be responsible. No, dear God, no. Look at Reddit. Hey, skim some Reddit posts. Who do they think it was? And they pick up this story and just fucking run it with zero fact checking. And it's like the cover story for their like you see at the grocery store or whatever. And there's like this. They falsely identified it being these two. It was really bad because it was these two Middle Eastern high school students. It was like Omar and something like that. Because it was two guys with like clearly like, non-American names. I probably born here. Like I'm assuming their parents were like immigrants or something, and so they gave them like more. It's that thing, like first generation. When they come over, they obviously have names from the homeland, and then they name their kids that, and then the grandkids are like, "I'm Jeff," that kind of thing. So they had these very like ethnic sounding Middle Eastern names, and the Daily Inquirer was like, yeah, it was fucking these guys, and they were just two guys. They were just two kids. They were just like high schoolers who were there because they were like track and field athletes or something, and their fucking faces are just on the cover with like image. It's just so bad. It was like and it wasn't even like suspicions. It was like these two did it, and it was 100% not them. And then there was like another like couple just random names that were getting thrown around that other reputable journalists pick up. Supposedly reputable journalists picked up. I think one from BuzzFeed and then one from like the Washington Post or Journal, or I don't know who. New York the names. These names always get me twisted. And they ended up like just one guy. There was like this name that it wasn't even a confirmed person, and this one BuzzFeed guy's like, it was this guy in a tweet, and then all these other supposedly more reputable news publications pick up on the tweet, do zero fact checking, and then just start running the story that it was that guy, and it was not that guy. In fact, the person, because I think it was like a dude who went missing or something, and his family was looking for him, and people thought that he was just like a potential, like, oh, this guy went missing. He was like supposed to be there. No, it turns out that guy. Does YouTube not like it when I say killed themselves? I do not like it. He threw himself into a river and drowned himself like a week earlier. Ooh, that's awkward. Yikes. Sorry, that guy's family. You had to find out like that. Yikesers. So, and so there's just all these fucking, imagine being the family of this person who, like, you just want to know what happened to, like, your brother or your son or something, or your cousin, and you're, like, desperately and then it comes out, people are like, think that he's a fucking terrorist, and it turns out, no, he did this, really, really unfortunately took his life, like, a week earlier. Like, fuck. And now people think he's a terrorist, and you're getting phone calls telling you that your dead son was a terrorist. Oh. So we did it Reddit. It's not an entirely accurate meme. It's actually a case where the blame lied more on the established media for doing zero fact checking and being a bunch of hacks. So I imagine. So that's what I'm saying they should do with Ken. I think it would be really funny. Oh god. Oh my god. Could you imagine if fucking they have a bit in game and it's like, and it's a similar kind of just like shit rag newspaper, and they're like, was it Rashid? Questions surrounding, is he a prince? What does Rashid do? I forget what he does. Questions surrounding the top tier. Oh my god. Well, there was that's not all that there was in the story. That was pretty much the whole Ken story was pretty much just, hey, this is pretty much just what it is. This is what's going on with him. They all showed off his classic costume, which looks pretty nice. And Ryu's classic costume, which looks pretty good. There is a little bit, honestly, that you sort of lose. So, like, one of the things that's cool, that's like a common design element with all of the gi characters, like all the characters in Street Fighter who wear the gi, is this very specific kind of detail that's not very realistic, but it looks cool, where the above their belt, the fabric kind of like poofs out a little bit, and so when they move, it kind of has this extra sort of sway, and it looks cool. It's like a very specific. It's not really, it's one of those sort of exaggerated parts of the character design. Like if you just look at like fucking SF, you can honestly look like any Street Fighter Shoto. Oh no, SF. It's giving me San Francisco. Street Fighter Shoto. If you just look at like any artwork, you can usually see some form of like, oh yeah, you can see the little bit of puff right above the belt, and it gives just a little bit of like dynamic, just a little touch, especially in motion. That's a big part. It's sort of toned down in this art style, but I think it looks pretty fine. I think it looks cool. Oh man, seeing Ken in 3D with a decent character model is pretty nice. You know what else is nice? Is the dynamic control article that they also wrote. Haha. That's my transition. With these segues, dude, you'd think I'd be annoying as fuck. People drive on a Segway. They're annoying. Yeah, calling out you Segway users. One time, my mom was in a grocery store, and there was a guy on a Segway that she met, and she fucked him. And I was like, "That you're so dumb. Why? Why would you do that? Because he was on a Segway? You knew that. Oh my fucking god." Anyway. They did an article on they broke the news on the dynamic control scheme that was kind of, they were sort of like hinting at, or there's this thing like, oh, there's a third control scheme option. Because we had the classic, we had the modern, we knew about those, we've known about them since the reveal, but there's this brand new dynamic mode one. I think that they've been working on it, which is why we haven't seen it yet. So the way this article is laid out is pretty funny as well. So basically it's the writer Brian Shea, and he's talking about how he's having lunch with Nakayama, the director, and they're eating sandwiches, and they're just talking about the game, and he says like, yeah, I really like, I think the gameplay is great, the art style's great, the real-time commentary is awesome, and so I'll just read. The director nods along with a smile until I mention how I don't feel the modern controls are for me, but my colleague loves the idea. And he links to an article that another writer, Marcus Stewart, wrote about the modern controls and how they kind of like can sort of level the playing field in a way for if you just want to sit down and play with a friend. I think it's a really smart move to allow players of various skill levels to get in on the fun and compete against those who have more experience with the Street Fighter franchise. He smirks and says, "There's actually a third control scheme." I love the way, like the scene in my head, there is another. Immediately, my interest is piqued. At that moment, he could only tell me a name for the option. Dynamic controls. Man, this restaurant, there's a photo of like the restaurant where they're eating. This looks gorgeous. It's like on a little riverway. There's like a bridge. This looks really nice. You just get to watch the river in like where is this, Osaka, I think? Yeah. Small sandwich shop overlooking the Higashi Yokobori River. That's a gorgeous looking place. Fuck, I want to travel now. I haven't wanted to travel it maybe ever. And I saw this sandwich shop. I'm like, fuck, oh my god, I want to go eat at a sandwich shop in Japan. Looking over a river. Anyway, so they get back and they show him a new build of the game that includes this brand new dynamic controls. And there's a video of this. There's been a lot of coverage of this so far, but this article is quite amusing. Because they have an image. So if you don't know what dynamic controls are, I guess I should run over the control schemes if people haven't been keeping up. Essentially, there are now 3 different control schemes that you can choose between in Street Fighter 6. Classic controls, which is what you would expect. It's 6 attack buttons, motion inputs, the works. There is modern controls, which is kind of like it's sort of the a simplified in a sense. It's basically taking, instead of like 6 attack buttons with 3 lights and 3 heavies, you have 1 light, 1 medium, and 3 punches and 3 kicks. You have 1 light, 1 medium, and 1 heavy, and a special move button. And the special move button basically works like Smash Brothers special moves. And then you have dedicated buttons for some of the system mechanics that are done with like button combos, like pressing 2 buttons at the same time in the classic controls. In modern controls, you just have a dedicated button for throw, drive impact, drive parry, that kind of thing. And you can hold down a button, and as long as you're holding it down, you'll do an auto combo. So that was kind of like their bridging the gap of like, okay, this isn't baby mode, but it's going to give you a limited use of your character. They've said that there's a little further down here where they said where Nakayama talks about how they didn't want the modern controls to be seen as like a training wheels kind of thing. We'll see how it ends up shaking out, but for now, that's sort of how I see it, and that's not even... Okay, so I just checked, and I ended up losing like 5 minutes of me talking because I don't know what the fuck happened with my microphone. It just started recording everything so loud, literally everything blew out the speakers. So, yeah, just gonna pick up right now. What the fuck was... Okay. So, I have to rewind like 5 minutes. Okay, what was I talking about? I was talking about the modern controls. Okay, there's this article. Let's get back on track. There's this article that he links to... Am I recording too loud now? God. Okay, everything... Oh my god. This is... Okay, let's just jump in. Let's get back in. Okay. There's this article that they link to, that he links to from one of his coworkers, Marcus Stewart, who had an experience where he was playing with a relatively inexperienced like fighting game player. They were playing a build of Street Fighter 6. And he was playing classic and the coworker was playing on modern controls. And there was this kind of interesting interaction where he saw that because there was a lot of like upfront basic knowledge stuff that his coworker didn't have to like get over, things like 3 different strengths of normals and motion inputs to do your special moves, he was kind of able to start tapping into the more like strategic elements of the genre. And I'll go ahead and read specifically from it, where he goes, thanks to the modern controls, he could keep up with me and I could go all out, making it a blast for both of us. Furthermore, I noticed that the longer we played, the more he improved at playing strategically. He even started baiting me into his assaults. I was honestly in awe at how rapidly he picked up more advanced behaviors, probably because he wasn't pausing every few seconds to say, let me check my move list real quick. Which is like a thing you've probably had if you've ever tried to play a fighting game with a friend who doesn't really play. Or you're playing a game that your friends know that you don't know. I go over to my friend's house and they have like MK11. I'm like, what the fuck? Okay, what do my moves do? And I have to play on pad. Ugh, I hate playing on pad. So like, I've said it before, but like, I think that other competitive genres do have the same, very similar hurdles. I think they're I don't think fighting games are particularly more difficult to learn than other genres, but they don't. The issue that I think the genre has had is that you have to pay $60 to then learn a bunch of shit before you can start playing, whereas most other competitive games are like free or have easily accessible free entries. Like, yeah, not every FPS is free, but CSGO is free. TF2 is free. There's a lot of options that you have that are popular that you can play with friends, for instance, to make it even easier. Fighting games just have lacked that for a really long time. So for someone who like is just gonna jump into the game, doesn't have too much experience with the genre, and they have to go. They can get it. They can kind of penetrate into the fun strategic parts of the game without having to dig their way through this knowledge, like physical hurdle of, okay, like what do my buttons do and where I have a lot of buttons. What do they do? I have different combos of buttons. I can, move in different ways and then hit a button and it makes another thing happen. And okay, what did that do? I have 3 strengths of that. It can get very complicated for someone who's not familiar with the genre. And I think what they're trying to do with modern controls is give those players an opportunity to kind of delve into, just kind of skip a bit of that at the expense of some of their control. And they kind of like try in this article to say that they in the dynamic controls article to say that modern controls are not meant to be that, but I think that's one of the positive effects that it can have, because yeah, ultimately you are losing like half your moveset, and if your character has more than 4 special moves, and characters have way more special moves in this game than they have in like any other game, you are just not going to be able to use them because the special button there's only enough slots. Literally, there's like forward, down, back, and neutral for the special, so you only have 4 spots. If you have more than that, you're gonna have to go to classic. So someone who's on modern controls and feels like, okay, they're enjoying it, and maybe they really like a character, and they're curious about like, okay, I'm kind of playing on this slightly limited form of it. What else? What is like the full capability of my character? I fully expect that someone is going to be able to play with modern controls, and it's going to give you at least the basics. I think what they're aiming for is that someone with modern and someone playing on modern and someone playing on classic is going to be able to start on the same floor, if that makes sense. But I think ultimately the ceiling is going to be higher on classic controls. That like, just the range of control you will have in Classic, I think you'll be able to make literally more specific decisions. But starting out, and I think especially at like lower ranks where most of your population is going to be, modern control is probably going to cut it just fine. Like you can probably, I expect that you'll probably be able to jump in to the game and play with modern controls and do just fine on like a casual, low-ranked level. And probably even at like a high level, a good player is going to be able to use modern controls and do fine as well, and put up some results, because the input is only part of the game, and the it's not affecting a lot of the strategy elements. It gives you less options, but it's not affecting it's not a gigantic, I imagine. I don't know. Then we go to dynamic mode. And dynamic mode is straight up easy mode. Straight up. So to get back to that article, you might have seen the video of them using dynamic mode. It is really funny. It's really funny. So, yeah, let's get, I'll read a bit from the article. Button masher is sometimes seen as an insult to players who randomly hit the buttons on their pad or board in hopes that they'll accidentally trigger some kind of effective attack. But for Nakayama, that notion gave him inspiration. Quote, in a normal fighting game, when they mash buttons, they just do a lot of whiffs. We wanted something important and something that makes a difference happen by randomly pressing buttons. While some initially consider modern controls an easy mode, since it simplifies it down to fewer buttons and inputs required for effectiveness, Capcom has worked to balance modern and classic controls against each other so they are both competitive in matches. Nakayama even thinks we'll see some high-level competitive players using modern controls in the future. As such, both modern and classic are available across all game modes, with no pressure from the game or developers to, quote-unquote, graduate to classic controls after playing with modern. I don't entirely... I believe that they're not going to put any pressure, but I don't necessarily believe in the idea that one is not inferior. Unless they've made some changes that I'm not aware of since like all the betas and everything. However, dynamic controls are explicitly meant to be closer to an easy mode, and as such are only available in local play. So, dynamic mode is essentially, if you go watch the video, and, okay, I think the graph that they have is the funniest, because there was the two different diagrams of what each button does in classic and modern, and you have like PS4 or the PS5 controller, and you have every single button kind of laid out and like, okay, here's what its function is, and here's just like a diagram to help you understand it. And then you get dynamic mode, and it's literally just the controller and 3 of the 4 attack buttons, 3 of the 4 face buttons are labeled auto attack. There is nothing else. Not even like... I don't know why the triangle isn't labeled. It's square, X, and circle are labeled auto attack. It's the only thing that's labeled. So dynamic mode is basically... I suspected this and they confirmed it in this article. You press a button... Well, it's basically an AI-assisted mode, like basically an autopilot is how I saw some people referring to it as. So it's an AI-assisted input mode where you press one of the face buttons and the game essentially makes decisions for you based off of various factors. So I assume that this is the same type of AI that they use in like, CPU matches or something like that. And they're just like they're and like when you press a button in dynamic mode, it just like does what the CPU would have done in that situation, using its like artificial intelligence essentially. I imagine that that's what's going on. So basically it's like in the video they're sitting down, and the Ryu, who is the producer, is using classic, the Luke player is using dynamic, and literally he sets the controller down on the table and he puts one finger on the X button and he just taps it, and he literally just hits it like a billion times. He's just mashing. He's just one button mashing on the controller. And Luke on screen, it's like, okay, full screen, he does a jump in and then a fireball, and it's basically, it's making decisions based off of like his distance from Ryu, whether or not he's standing or crouching, because you can still have like manual like movement and all that, and I think you can like crouch and jump, where like how much resource he has, all this stuff. So there is like some amount of control of like, I imagine that you're not going to do a sweep unless you're crouching, or, you know, you're not going to, it's not going to, yeah, basically something like that. When you do jump, you're only going to get jumping attacks or something like that, which I don't know what else you would get. I don't even know why I said that. I'm so stupid. So the name comes from the notion, this is from reading from the article, that the AI essentially decides dynamically which attack to perform as you press the face buttons based on your character's... Oh, that's exactly what I said. That's exactly what I said. While button mashing is a viable strategy when using dynamic controls, strategy still plays a role, and you can still manually perform parries, okay, and move the character using the D-pad. After getting my hands on the control option... Oh, so also in dynamic mode, it will just... there's a moment where it uses drive impact, like on reaction, I'm assuming. So like, I don't know, do you get to do that manually, or is that just on the, when you're using, is that just when the CPU decides that you got to do that? But I guess you can manually input a parry. Can you do the, drive reversal? Like while you're blocking and you press a button, maybe? Can you... trying to think of other mechanics. I guess it pretty much covers the ones that they showed off. Will it do full on like drive rush cancel out of parry, that kind of thing that we were seeing in the beta? After getting my hands on the control option, it's safe to say that I won't be using it personally, but it's the kind of mode that would have been great for playing my SNES copy of Street Fighter II Turbo with my younger brother. And then there's just a kind of closing paragraph about these three control schemes in tow. Street Fighter VI feels like the most approachable and accessible entry in the franchise's 35-year history. Glad more players have the option to jump into the fun with modern controls, and to a further extent, dynamic controls. So one important thing about dynamic controls is that they are only available offline. You cannot go into a ranked match and just have the CPU play for you. You cannot do that. You are going to have to... It's essentially what people have been dubbing it as, is it's the little brother mode, or it's the party mode, where fucking bunch of friends, no one knows how to play the game. Fuck it, put them on dynamic mode, and they can still move around, and they probably won't even know the difference. They probably won't even know the difference between the computer just randomly selecting what your character is going to do and having a full range of like full control over your character. All they're gonna, the only difference is gonna be that I'm assuming dynamic control is gonna be more effective than just button mashing with modern or classic controls. Personally, there's no objection to this. People were, there's always those people who are freaking out when the modern controls were first revealed, and it's like, I mean, this stuff has existed. You want to know? I've been thinking of this story. The example people were using was like, Guilty Gear Xrd had stylish mode. Did not compromise the competitive integrity of the game at all, right? You want to know what example I would use? Okay. Back a couple months ago when the video game museum that I did some volunteer work for when I went to GDC, they did their grand reopening, the MADE, the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment in Oakland, California. Shouts out. And they did their grand reopening, and Kat and I went. And essentially the way that the museum works is that they have a lot of... so it's a little... People kind of ask, like, okay, how many games do you have, like, physically? Technically, they have every game that is in, like, their library, they do own a physical copy of. But if you go there to play anything, because it's a fully playable video game museum, most of the time you're going to be playing on emulation. And that is mainly, especially for older games, that's mainly to preserve the physical quality of the games. So basically they'll have a console that is set up with something like for instance, a Super Nintendo cartridge, that it's like a modded SNES cart that has like 1 billion ROMs on it. And they can do that legally because it's a non-profit. And they are exempt from copyright laws. So it's all cool. Fuck you, Nintendo. So we sit down at the GameCube because I think she wanted to play a Hello Kitty game. And we ended up looking through the games list, and I was like, oh shit, I forgot CVS 2 was on here. And so we played a little bit of Capcom vs. SNK 2, which I find is a really fun game just for casuals, because it's a very like short combo, decent damage kind of game. You get like 3 characters. It's a lot of fun. And so we boot it up, and when we get to character select, so if you've played CVS 2 before, you know that before you select your character, you select your groove. The game essentially has 6 different styles, which give like different mechanics. CVS 2 has some very interesting systems going on. So they have 6 different grooves, which are basically just like, oh, can you block? With this one, the meter works differently. Like it's C, A, and P grooves, and S, N, and K grooves. So C groove is you have like a 3-tiered super meter and you get access to 3 supers. A groove is it's like a Street Fighter Alpha 2 meter where you get to do like custom combos and stuff like that. What's P groove? Oh, it's Street Fighter 3. You get to use parries, and there's some other stuff. So that there's that whole thing. But before even that, it says so I'm expecting just select your groove, and you just select K groove because it's just the easiest one. And but before even that, it says select your ism, and I'm like, the ism? Huh? So, because I'm thinking, when you say isms, that's a Street Fighter Alpha 3 thing, where they let you kind of do the same thing of between 3 different styles of meter. X, Y, and V-ism, I think were the 3 ones. No, A, X, and V-ism, that's what they were called. And that's the first thing I thought of, but that wasn't what you were selecting between. It was between GC-ism and AC-ism. I'm like, she's like, oh, what is this? And I'm like, I have no idea. And we both just pick GC-ism because it's the first option. And I'm like, guess we'll figure it out. So we go into game, and I'm playing, I think, Yamazaki. And I'm just trying to figure out the controls, right? Because I'm using a GameCube controller. Like I don't know where things are mapped to, and I can't figure out like how to do this or that, and then just randomly I hit the C stick. I tap the C stick in a direction, and Yamazaki does like Snake Lash, or Surf and Lash. I always forget what it's called. He does his little like lash move, and I'm like, huh? And then I press it again in a different direction, and he does like his reflector, like his uppercut reflector move, and I'm like, no fucking way. No way. It was GameCube-ism and arcade-ism. And arcade-ism is, I'm assuming, the regular full range, like essentially classic mode, if we're using the Street Fighter example, Street Fighter 6. And GameCube-ism is all of your special moves are on the C stick. And I'm like, oh my god. So the very next match, I'm a fucking asshole and I pick Sagat. and I just zone with Tiger Shot. And she tries to jump, and I'm like, I bet it's down on the C stick. And then I do Tiger Uppercut and anti-air her, and I'm just fucking... I felt like such an asshole, but it was so funny. So when people get upset over these kinds of like easy input style modes, dog, this has been around since like, I don't know, probably like 2002 or 2003, whenever that port came out. It's not an issue. It's it won't be. I doubt it'll be very significant. And even if it is, hey, I don't think that modern controls are going to be like objectively superior. And I think Capcom is very wary of that, because it really seems like this is a game where they're actually trying to please multiple audiences, and they're actually doing it in a smart way, and not the Street Fighter V way where they completely misunderstood what casual and competitive players like, and they ended up pleasing neither of them. This seems like they're actually like taking steps to appease both kinds of audiences, and they're doing it, shocker, by giving more options instead of less. Yeah, if you want some more details on that, I think I went into it a bit on my Street Fighter V's fiasco in that video, near the, and kind of like the after the match section. But yeah, SF5 really tried to appease both audiences, and then it's just so many decisions that were like, this was so misguided. And 6 seems way more comfortable, and like they understand the actual needs and wants of both audiences. And dynamic control is one of them. This is like, okay, no one's gonna use this outside of a party setting, and like, fuck it, it's a party setting. Who cares? I think Maximilian Dude described it as frat bro mode or something like that. Like, fucking yeah, let's put on this dude's game. I'm just hitting buttons. Because, like, they don't know. Like, you don't know if you've never played a fight. You're just hitting buttons, and, like, you don't know what they're supposed to do or what they don't do. You're just seeing things happen, and dynamic mode just means that those things are, like, somewhat effective and not, like, ugh, like, whatever. And it's going to be offline only, so this isn't happening in ranked. Although I would love to see an offline tournament, like a side tournament or something. I think that would be really funny at some event. And just do dynamic mode only. And I genuinely wonder, like, would the results be completely random? Or would, like, good players, quote unquote, would, like, people who did well using modern or classic controls do just as well with dynamic, I wonder? Or would it actually just be random? And if it's random, that's great for the party mode feature. Because randomness is a key aspect of turning up the casual factor. So that it's not so skill intensive. That's another... Yeah, I just thought about that. There's a lot of people who be like, yeah, Smash is a party game. You have to play with an alternative rule set to make it competitive. And it's like, that's why it's popular. Because it gives you the option to play it competitively, except for Brawl, where they tried their hardest not to. And it gives you the option to play competitively if you would like. Or you can play casually if you would like. And both are perfectly valid. And both audiences are satisfied. And the casual audience might even make a transition into getting interested in the competitive scene because they enjoyed the game. Isn't that great? Isn't that something? Ain't that something? It's pretty much everything I had to say about the Game Informer article. Everything will be linked down below. And before we get into a big story this week, I would like to touch on we'll talk about it. This is a story from Kotaku. Excuse me. Cop discharged for trying to scam store out of $400 worth of Pokémon cards. You'll take it in for a second. This comes to us from Luke Plunkett, who I feel like is actually, shout out to Luke Plunkett. He has a pretty solid history. I remember his name. It's always unfortunate when sites like Kotaku run bullshit, stupid, dumb stories that are just meant to be sensationalist, because there's people who do good work. And when the editors let through just trash like that so that they can get engagement clicks, it devalues the work of these other people. I feel like I've enjoyed every article I've read from Luke Plunkett. He consistently has done pretty well. Oh my god, he wrote that article from a few days ago. Americans elect first ever known Kingdom Hearts fan to Congress. Fucking... I just feel like bringing it up because, I feel like every time people say Kotaku, it's like, oh. But, there are people who do good stuff. You just have to have a discerning eye and remember... the fact that I even remember his name, part of the fact is that Plunkett's a funny name, is, a good thing. Anyway, let's get into this story. A former officer of the Johnson County Sheriff's Office in Kansas has had his police license revoked after he was caught trying to shortchange a store out of nearly $400 worth of Pokemon cards. Ooh, okay, so this story is fucking... Okay, this could only happen in Kansas, which is a state that... So... Anyway, it is a state. It's one of the states of all the states in the Union, Kansas is one of them. I feel like the most famous thing about Kansas is a quote about not being in Kansas anymore. Kind of reminds me of Florida. There was this funny story about how there's this video called Why Do Pop Punk Bands All Hate Their Hometown? Which is all just about all these songs from emo and pop punk bands that are I hate this town. And the guy in the made the video deduced that a large majority of bands who wrote songs about hating their hometown came from Florida, which is really funny. There's a Modest Mouse song called Florida, and like I genuinely don't know what the song is about, except for the only thing I can glean from it is that there was one time when Isaac Brock was in Florida, and the entire song is about how he wants to get the fuck out of Florida. And the chorus says, you're never far enough. The chorus is literally, far enough, never far enough. Even as I left Florida, far enough, wasn't far enough. Couldn't try to escape myself. Far enough, far from Florida. Anyway, so this police officer, William Knight, who is a full-time law enforcement officer since 2019, in May of this year, so I guess this was a recently resolved dispute. In May of this year, okay, that didn't fuck up my. I bumped my keyboard on the microphone. He was in a retail store. That's what it was. They don't say exactly which retail store it was, and there's actually a link to the summary order of revocation, which just describes it as a retail store. So was this a GameStop? Who knows? In uniform, he was in uniform when he, quote, aroused the suspicions of an asset protection investigator. So basically, he's a guy in full uniform. Asset protection. Is this a guy who's just in the store? Investigator. Because apparently this all happened, like, in there. Like, this wasn't like they reviewed the tapes or anything. Asset protection investigator. Ensures that a company loss is kept to a minimum. So I guess the guy was just there? Or something? Because the way it's written, it makes it seem like there was a confrontation. Where, so, the cashier notices that something was up, and after alerting the asset protection investigator, Knight pretended that he had just received a phone call. I just got a call. Oh, I gotta go. He was quickly identified and later had to admit that he indeed tried to scam them. You want to know what he did? He was taking barcodes off of cheap items from his home, taking them to the store and trying to replace the codes on the Pokémon cards with the cheap. So he would like buy something cheap at the store that had like a barcode sticker, take it off, had, I guess, like, had them like in his pot, or like had like stuck them, like just stuck one end of the, I don't know how he managed to transport all these stickers that he'd peeled off. Took them to the store and tried to place them on the cards so that when the cashier would scan it, it would show up as cheaper than it really was, which doesn't it work like when you scan a barcode, doesn't it say the name of the item? What was he thinking? What did he think was going to happen? What did he think? Were they placed properly? I have to imagine that if you're just taking random stickers off of like different items that you have around your home, that you like that they're not the same size. So like you could probably just eyeball it. Do Pokemon cards have? I guess they would have. Do they have not zip code? Barcode. Do they have like a barcode sticker, or is it just? I guess is it a stick? I have no clue. Maybe it was packs, like the boxes. All right. Yeah. The back of 12 whole boxes of Pokemon cards, and thought he could get away with buying them at a greatly reduced price. And the cashier was like, this doesn't make any sense. Because you have to imagine that people come into the store and they buy those boxes, so the cashier knows just from seeing the number repeatedly about how much they're supposed to cost. And when this motherfucker brings 12 to the counter and it comes out to like $20 and he's like, whoa, you're like, what? Does this make any sense? What? And especially if the barcodes are like improper. What the fuck? And if it's not even the same product, like, how? How did you think only in Kansas, man? Those Kansas fellas, they're on some other shit. Well, Knight escaped. So he was charged with 1 count of unlawful acts involved in theft detection. While Knight escaped a criminal case, his actions were also brought before the Kansas Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, the government body overseeing the apportionment of cops in the state. They determined that because Knight lacks the personal qualities of integrity required, he was unfit to continue serving, and so last month revoked his license to serve as an officer. Knight had already left his role at the Johnson County Sheriff's Office 3 days after the incident, so this wasn't a firing, more of a prevention of him getting police work elsewhere in the state. Oh my god, this is a quote from his lawyer. Unfortunately, in a time of severe stress and anxiety, he exercised poor judgment, leading to this arrest and charge. What kind of a statement is that? Dude, I'm so stressed. I'm so stressed. I have to fucking go. I have to find some way to unwind. I'm gonna commit fraud. That's how I'm gonna blow some steam off. I'm gonna rip some barcode stickers off items from around my house. Go to a store and buy Pokemon cards, and I'm gonna try and scam the store. That's the only. I'm so stressed right now. Dude, this would cause more stress to me. Fucking what? I would be walking up with like 12 boxes in my arms, just like, fucking, please don't notice, please don't notice, please don't notice. You have to be praying that the employee hates their job so much that they're not going to say anything. You have to be praying that they've already put in their 2 weeks notice. Despite his discharge from the JCSO, Mr. Knight is gainfully employed, supporting his family and his family? How old is this guy? He said he got hired in 2019, but no, he's been serving that specific sheriff's office since 2019. So, do you think he has a wife? Do you think he knows? How do you think she found out? How do you think he told her? Trying to make amends to the victim, his community, and his family through the DA's diversion program. I don't know what the fuck. This is, and the comments are exactly what you would think. The first comment on this article: murdering black people? A-okay. Trying to steal Pokemon cards? Whoa. That's a step too far, buddy. Wait. ABC News. Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so someone's linking. I had to just quickly scan. Was it the... Okay. There's a funny thing. Back in, there's a link to a story from 22 years ago, and from ABC News from 2000. Someone has linked. This is fun. I like to bring this up sometimes to people, talking about really funny police things that happen. There was a case in 2000 where a man wanted to become a police officer. Okay? And in order to take to become a police officer, you have to pass a couple tests. Obviously, there's physical ones. There's also mental ones. You have to take an IQ test to become a police officer. You'd think most people would be able to pass that. Well, he actually didn't. And it wasn't because he was, like, clinically, disabled, like, mentally. No. It was because his IQ was too high. They refused to hire him. He aced everything else. They refused to hire him because his IQ was too high. And he was like, what the fuck? So I guess he tried to sue them. Or sue the city. This was in New York. The Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New York upheld a lower court's decision that the city did not discriminate against Robert Jordan because the same standards were applied to everyone who took the test. And there's a quote from him where he says, "This kind of puts an official face on discrimination in America against people of a certain class. I maintain you have no more control over your basic intelligence than your eye color or your gender or anything else." This is so funny. So he was basically claiming discrimination against smart people, which is definitely an interesting angle to take. But I think what you can really glean from that is that it's totally okay, by law, it's okay for I can't even think of another job where you can be rejected for being too intelligent. I can't even imagine that. And you're giving these people guns. So just remember, every time you see a police officer, he's under a certain range. Maybe he's not. Maybe different departments enforce it differently. But you never know. That's a funny story in kind of a weird, dark way. And probably the last thing I'm going to talk about, this was a really heavy story. And a big one, too. And it's the Mick Gordon post. So, if you weren't aware, Mick Gordon, awesome composer, excellent music composer. He did the music for Killer Instinct 2013. And most recently, he's been lauded for his work on the Doom reboot. So he did the Doom 2016 and the Doom Eternal soundtracks. And when Eternal came out, one of the deluxe collector's edition bonuses was that you would get an official OST. That ended up getting delayed. Excuse me. Or there were issues with getting the OST out. People were a little upset. And then when the quality of the OST, or when the OST did come out, a lot of fans were upset over the quality of the tracks. It was messed up, let's say. It was below what you would expect. And Marty Stratton of id Software, a producer on the game, I believe. Producer. What is his official Marty Stratton, id Software, Marty Stratton. Executive producer for id Software. So an exec went to Reddit and basically wrote up this big long post about how Mick is just such an artist type and he's a little difficult to work with and he's just, he really likes to take his time and we really gave him as many chances as we could. But he was being very lazy is the thing. So that's why it didn't come out on time. Well, it's been about 2 years and Mick Gordon has finally written up a gigantic statement on Medium.com partially advised over by his lawyers. So it's a little serious. And his version of events is a little different. And in fact, he has much more proof to back up his version of events. So it's a long article. It's a long account. And I would encourage you to go read it if you're curious about the situation. I would maybe ask that you not read it if you're really prone to getting upset over people being fucked over by companies. If one of your triggers is poor management, maybe don't read this. It's just going to make you mad. So I can give I was kind of thinking, because it is so long, it's listed as a 58-minute read. I think it literally took me about that long to actually dig through the whole thing. So I don't know exactly how I'm going to tackle this, but I'll basically, because there's many parts, there's many steps in this process. Let's start from the beginning and kind of go over what happened. So obviously, Mick did a bang-up job on the Doom 2016 soundtrack. And they asked him to come back for Eternal. He said awesome. And there's a couple things that he establishes early on in the opening of the article, as points of note, to kind of explain how the industry works, how composing for games works, and on like a business side. Basically, like what the actual job entails. So, he's a contractor. Contracts are integral, and so basically, there's a difference between the in-game score, and the OST, the official soundtrack. So, the in-game score is because Doom and a lot of games now have dynamic. Kind of like dynamic music, where the music will change based off of what is happening in the game. If you're in a combat section, it's going to get more intense. If you're just walking around, it's going to be more ambient, that kind of thing. And there's all this, audio engineering and programming and stuff to make those go into each other, blend into each other. And also on the composing side, you have to compose it, I imagine, in a certain way where there's connection points between different parts of a track, where the game can loop into it. It's probably a skill that you could figure out, like, maybe don't have crazy chord stuff going on because it's going to be really awkward if there's going to be a big transition. I don't know. I'm just assuming it's a specific thing. The OST is a completely different thing. The OST is an album. And that's basically done by taking those chunks, those bits and separate files, and combining and rearranging and basically remixing those pieces into complete songs with a beginning, middle, and end. And so for, imagine like, okay, he's going to write all this music for one level. That level is going to be its own track on the OST. And he's going to take all those, and he's going to take, okay, here's the ambient part, and then it ramps, and then, whatever he wants to, however he wants to do it. Those are two different things. In-game score and OST. They're different things, and very important, they have different contracts. So you get a contract for an in-game score, and you get a separate contract for an OST. They're different things. So the way that he has a breakdown of the way that... This is also an interesting way to learn about how some composition stuff works, if you're curious about how video game music is composed on a business end. So basically, the in-game score is budgeted in minutes. Basically, the developers calculate the expected length of a score at the beginning of the project and negotiate a per-minute rate with the composer, which is written into the game's music contract. Doom Eternal's contracted budget was 142 minutes. So at the beginning of development, When they first reached out to him to come back, they said, let's write a contract. We assume we're gonna need 142 minutes of music. And then there was some negotiation back and forth. And they decided on a rate. So let's say $5 per minute. I don't know. And that equals to however much he's supposed to get paid, for example. Times 142. That is important to know. So this has like a whole table of contents. So there's a couple. So basically, okay. So the way it starts out is they get this contract done for the in-game score. Nothing on an OST, mind you. That'll become important later. So basically at the beginning, id tells him, we're going to need 2 levels per month. We're going to need like 2 level scores per month. And Mick's like, okay, that's a 2-week turnaround per level, but okay, I think it's possible. And he says, whoever dreamt up that plan did so in isolation, because it quickly became apparent how disconnected it was from the game's actual development. Release was still 2 years away. The schedule, however, demanded I deliver a steady stream of final music immediately. That's important. Final music. So often, what he kind of goes into is because the development process of a game, especially a big game like this, the scope and the ideas of the game are going to change throughout development. It happens in like every game. I feel like everyone has one game they love where you look at like what were the original concepts is completely different with ideas that they were tossing around before they got to the final vision. Well, if you're a musician and you care, because Mick Gordon really cares about the music and he's really invested in like creating an actual great suite of music for a game. So he obviously wants like, okay, if there's a recurring character, I want to write a motif for them. And maybe there's a level, I'm just going out like part of what I imagine his mindset is like. If you're someone like him who cares, you're like, okay, in this level, early in the game, this character shows up and there's like a leitmotif that it starts to kind of like appear in that level's theme, and then later on there's a boss fight with them, and then like that little leitmotif becomes like the main melody of the boss theme, just something like that. Like that's the kind of thing that is really cool, and it's one of those musical touches, if you really care, that is like it's a big part of the experience. So he basically had zero direction, according to him, like pretty much not, like they were still in the very much like ideas phase of what's the story going to be? What are the characters going to be? What are the levels going to be? How many of them are there going to be? What kinds of enemies are there? What are some big set piece? Nothing was concrete yet, but yet they wanted him to have basically the whole thing finished and locked in at the very start. And he's like contacting them just for anything, for any kind of like direction. So like most levels were still getting blocked out or didn't exist, and the quote fantasy combat puzzle design philosophy wasn't yet clear. Most people responsible for capturing gameplay footage were only sometimes available, and unstable builds often made recording video hopeless. Details on boss encounters, cutscenes, main menu design, game flow, story, lore, and character arcs were still a year away. So, like, he has like nothing to go off of, and he's just shooting in the dark. He's composing in the dark. Without not even know what he's writing music about. He goes, I tried, but Doom Eternal was already heading in a new direction, and my experience on Doom 2016 wasn't much help. Other factors also upset the pace early on. A contract delay on id Software's side led to a late start, putting us behind schedule immediately. A surprise 2-week all-hands-on-deck marketing interruption took 6 weeks instead. So 6 weeks, that's 3 songs. That's 3 songs where he just can't talk to anyone. Communication was slow, with id Software often too busy to respond to basic questions faster than a week. On a 2 levels per month deadline, that's a big deal. Conversations were bogged down with unnecessary arguments arising from unrealistic expectations, such as why the complex metal choir recording, which later took months to execute, couldn't be done in the first 2 weeks. So, like, yeah, when they have these big choir sections of, like, heavy metal, they need to find people, they need to fly them out, they need to, like, reserve studio time, they need to, like, probably get hotel space for them. It's a kind of a complex process. It's totally doable, but, like, you gotta, and this like, why can't you do it in 2 weeks? In the first 2 weeks, mind you, when he doesn't have any idea what he's even writing about. 2 months in, it was clear the schedule wasn't going to work. It was a masterpiece in Excel, but a disaster in reality. The requirements to write, perform, record, produce, mix, master, and implement 2 levels of music with feedback rounds every 30 days, when the levels themselves were bare bone, now looked ridiculous. It was simply too early to attempt locking off music. So he goes to id, and he basically says, hey, like, I get it. It was a bad idea. It's a bad schedule. We can still work something out, and we can make something that's going to be more realistic. So he explains why the current plan is impractical. Yeah, finalizing the intricate music was practically impossible this early. Guesswork was his only option. He could only see a future filled with rejections and demand. Like, yeah, he's like, if I do work now, you're just going to reject it because it's not going to fit later. Why would I do all this work? Just, like, it's going to be wasted. It's dumb. No time for iteration. The pace pressured the audio team to approve music, deduct minutes from the budget, and pay out milestones before having the ability to test it thoroughly. And 0 wiggle room. Any slip meant milestones would bleed into one another, requiring crunch to catch up. So here was his solution. He basically went to them and proposed a usual approach to game composing. So first, define the overall game's musical identity by writing strong, reusable themes before ramping up production of final musical assets when the game's exact needs become apparent. So, like, what you would imagine you would do for game composing. You start out with, like, okay, you sit down with the developers, and they're like, this is the basic direction we're going for. And then you write some very broad, flexible ideas in music. You basically create like a skeleton soundtrack, maybe. And then once the game is starting to take shape and you're communicating, you take all these skeleton ideas and you start fleshing them out. It's a good metaphor. You start fleshing them out until you, I imagine there's a lot of going in, reworking, rewriting stuff, but it's way more flexible and easy to work with the way that games are developed, the way that they progress and change over the course of their creation. Whereas this, like, super tight, strict, everything's got to be done before the game we even know what it is, it makes no sense. It was early in development and the perfect time to make the change. My proposal was easy to execute, fit the development schedule and budget, and would facilitate an overall better result. I was confident management would see the benefits and adopt the plan. I was wrong. And who strikes it down? It was Marty. It was Marty Stratton. He rejected my belief that the current schedule was flawed and suggested my act of trying to do something about it was a sign of incompetence. So here's a recurring theme that happens throughout Mick Gordon's story, which is shitty planning and refusal to admit that your planning was bad, and working with the guy who knows what he's doing who you have gone to specifically to do the thing for you, to make a better plan. Basically, Marty Stratton has an ungodly ego, from what I can glean from this. Just an completely insufferable need to maintain his self-image. And any suggestion. And Mick Gordon, like, he's got the email. Like, he's got copies of the emails. He's very diplomatic, very polite in all of these. No strong language. No, like, you're fucking killing me over here with this shit. None of that. Just straight up, like, hey, I think this would be better. I don't think it's viable. And just, that's a personal insult to Marty Stratton. You fucker. You think, what the fuck? You can't do what I asked you to? You're a fucking idiot. That's what you are. If you've ever tried to work with someone like that, you want to fucking rip their head off. It's the most infuriating thing ever. Like, complete blow up. So he's like, okay, fine. So he goes along trying his best, and it's exactly what he predicted. As the game started, like, taking shape, his just, like, shot in the dark compositions just weren't working. In his words, weeks of work got thrown in the trash, and calls for urgent rewrites came amid milestones already packed tight. So, I can't believe this happened. No one could have predicted this. And we're all looking for the guy who did this. So it's just, all of these issues are compounding, and it's everything he said was going to happen, and it's happening. As development progressed, it became obvious whoever thought up the music budget also had no idea about the game's true scope. Stages blew out in size far beyond what had been anticipated. So here's, like, a very practical issue. When you're writing something like the ambient version of a stage's theme, right? Just the low-key ambient soundtrack. That's going to be looping, right? You're designing it to play on some kind of a loop. Well, he had written them because he was kind of assuming it was going to be like Doom 2016, because he had no idea what was going on. He had no idea what it was going to look like. So he just like, okay, Doom 2016, there's, it's like, Doom 2016, it's a lot of like combat, hallway, combat, hallway, combat, hallway. So maybe like a 30-second section is fine to loop, because you're not going to be spending too much time walking around. And then now it's like an hour-long level, and you're doing platforming, and you're exploring around the level, and you're not engaged, and the scope is way bigger and wider. And he's like, oh no, like, this doesn't work. A 30-second loop it's going to be awful. It's going to be super grating and repetitive, and it's going to suck because, he cares. So he identifies this issue, and he brings it up, and he's like, yeah, this has to be rewritten. And because, he said, Doom's mantra is wall-to-wall music. So, like, there's always got to be music. It's a cornerstone of Doom. I was able to convince id Software to dedicate more minutes to these areas, but only after wasting valuable time on unnecessary demonstrations to prove that 30 seconds wasn't nearly enough. To compensate for the shortfall, they didn't unlock any more budget. Instead, they reallocated minutes from the game's combat music pool, meaning other areas had less music as a result. So, like, no, we won't pay you more. We won't just go from, maybe renegotiate the contract to go from like 142 to, double that, let's say. No, we're gonna, or a third more of that. We're just gonna take from the other game, from other parts of the game. I worked straight for months, desperately trying to stay on top of things that each week seemed to bring a new set of problems. I was cut out of music meetings, my emails went unanswered, and the mandated file transfer system auto-deleted all the music files every 2 weeks. id Software withheld important information, and I was hardly ever able to check my music in-game. Weekly calls with the audio team, which I relied on as a source for crucial creative information to do the job, were frequently hijacked by panic-stricken managers who seldom brought anything helpful to the table and instead just hiked up stress levels. So he's trying to have a meeting about like, okay, so what are you looking at for this level? And there's just this manager, oh my god, oh no, it has to be done. No, it has to be, and just talking over everyone. He's like, shut the fuck up. The heaping list of problems and their accumulative effect on the schedule didn't seem to matter to those people whose only method of response was messages laced with criticism. More crunch, less sleep. So then he gets into a section called pay issues. And this is where it starts getting real. So he wrote 2 entire suites, Super Gore Nest and Mars Core, those 2 levels, and those were used in the that music was used at QuakeCon to show off the game at the premiere of the game in 2018, and then they rejected those songs afterwards. They rejected that music, and when music gets rejected, you have to replace that in terms of your minutes. So if you write 5 minutes of music and they reject it, you have to write another 5 minutes of music. It doesn't count, the stuff that got rejected, to hit your 142, in this case, minute quota, essentially. And so they didn't want to pay him for work that he'd done and they'd used in marketing. And he was like, what the fuck? So that's usage. You're using it in marketing. They owed me compensation. In this case, they caved. So they actually did pay him, but they didn't want to, which is a fucking huge dick move. As development continued, they grew reluctant to approve anything I delivered. The audio team, they just they keep rejecting everything, and he's not being paid. If he doesn't get approved, he's not getting paid. So he turns in, let's say, 10 minutes, and he gets 10 minutes worth of payment. Let's say, $5 a minute, he's going to get $50, let's say. So if they're rejecting it, he's not getting paid. He went 11 months without being paid once by them because of this. And he is just working these just back-to-back all-nighters for months, and everything he's doing is getting rejected. And whenever he tries to bring up anything, the management just says, yeah, it's because you're fucking bad at your job. Why are you so bad at your job? Why aren't you doing what we want? I can't even conceive how frustrating and awful this is. This is just, like, why? It's borderline malice. And then things get worse, as he writes. The Doom Eternal soundtrack announcement. So remember, like, at the beginning of this when I mentioned that the in-game score and the OST are separate projects with different contracts? Yeah. So in 2019 at E3, they get on stage at id and they announce that the deluxe collector's edition, whatever it's called, the special collector's edition, which will include Mick Gordon's original Doom Eternal soundtrack and OST. When that was announced, they had not signed a contract for an OST. In fact, they hadn't even approached him about doing an OST. They hadn't told him that they were even going to announce this. He found out because of the reporting on it. He found out like how Sakurai found out he was going to develop Brawl. He's like... So his reaction is pretty reasonable. He goes, huh? What the fuck? Because they started selling pre-orders immediately. So he says, hey, so, like, people are paying for this thing with the expectation that they're going to get a thing, this other thing. And that other thing doesn't exist, isn't being worked on, and in fact, will not even start being worked on until you give me a contract. Because he'd been burned in the past working on another Bethesda game where they signed, they wanted him to do an OST. He did it without having a contract on good faith. And then when it was basically all done, they said, yeah, we're not going to use that. So fuck off. And then he never got paid. So he learned a very important lesson from that, which is don't do work without a contract. Because they're going to try and fuck you over. Maybe they won't. But just in case, you can't trust them. I mean, he even goes on to say that, like, he mainly has an issue with id Software management, and specifically Marty Stratton. Apparently, there was lots of other people at id who were just wonderful, which is nice, but, like, management was going to try and fuck you over. So, he's not going to start work on this, and he's like, hey, yeah, as of now, this thing is not going to exist, and you're taking people's money for it. So, do you think that's a bad idea? That seems like a bad idea. Pretty sure people are going to have a bad reaction when you fail to deliver on this promise that was literally impossible. Oh, and yeah, he even says, E3 events are planned out months in advance, well-rehearsed and carefully managed. But nobody thought to discuss the OST with me in any way whatsoever. I learned about it in the media. So he basically sends an urgent message to them saying, you've put me in a very difficult situation. We need to speak immediately. And Marty Stratton comes back and says, no, we're not going to write you a contract. We're not even going to entertain a discussion about the OST. Because it'll be a distraction from what you really need to be doing, the in-game score, which, yeah, you've been kind of fucking up on, Mick. And Mick is like, what? There's no way that you can't see the issue here. And Marty just, no, I'm not having this conversation. And then just closed, just fucking left the talk. And then pre-orders sold out in days. So he's like, okay. And so this is a really fucking asshole thing to do to somebody. Because to go so far as to call it Mick Gordon's Doom Eternal OST is like, do you, like, that's, like, personal. Like, you're putting his name on it. Like, it's like sabotage. There's, like, malice in here. So, development continues. He's not getting paid. And he's like, there's no fucking way I haven't met my minutes thing. Are you really rejecting everything? And then they would take other stuff that they'd already accepted and then reject it and ask new things. And when he tries to make any kind of demand or try to stand up for himself, they basically do they gently imply that they're going to sue him. So he's actually considers suing. But he's like, fuck, I can't, like, he was worried he would lose more by walking away than staying, essentially, is how he describes it. Because they put him in a shitty fucking situation. If he walks away, it's going to look terrible for him. Like, oh, you promised to do an OST and then you just left the game? What the fuck, dude? Like, it's all going to be pinned on him. So the game gets delayed 6 weeks from the release date. And he's like, oh, okay. We have a 5-month extension now. And he's like, it was a good call. He said because Bethesda didn't want a repeat of Fallout 76. So he's like, it was a good idea to delay it, and hey, maybe it'll give me some more time to work on this fucking game. And then they start rejecting more stuff that he'd already submitted. No, we need more stuff. He's experiencing a lot of issues. And he's like, dude, like with his family, his personal life, he's been sleeping in the office for months. He hasn't seen his family fucking because he's working all the time. And when he says, I need to be paid now, they say no. And this is fucking like, okay. Trigger warning if you've worked in retail or with a shitty manager. According to them, I was the one being difficult. The word they used was ball ache. And they urged in no uncertain terms to carefully consider the destination my protest would lead to. Oh, this is like, Mick Gordon is a saint for not ordering a hit on whoever said that to him. There are very reasonable, rational people who would fucking snap if you haven't been paid in 10 months and they're fucking you over and they're going to smear your name by announcing things and putting your name on it that you haven't done yet. And you bring up the fact that you need to get paid because you haven't been paid in 11 months and they call you a ball ache. I would rip that guy's fucking head off if he said that to me. I'm trying to even think of the last time I've lost my temper. It's been a really long time. That would make me do it. That would make me fucking... So he fucking toughs it out. He gets paid. Eventually. At the end of the month, he gets paid. He says, I finished the project feeling unhappy, empty, and in a state of anxiety. I crunched for 2 years straight thanks to a rigid, brutal music schedule that attempted to finalize the score before the game was ready for it. Pay disputes, project uncertainty. I understand this approach was supposedly intended to elicit an efficient performance, but in reality, it was spectacularly inefficient. By the end of the project, I delivered more than double the minutes stated in the contract. So they were like, "Oh, it'll be so easy. We'll just have all the music done at the start, and it'll be so efficient." And in fact, he ends up wasting half of the minutes. Unbelievably inefficient. So the game comes out, and it's well received. It sells well. People were like, wow, you got a great soundtrack, dude. So where's the OST? And we get to the section. Still no OST deal. With the in-game score out of the way, Marty had no excuse for holding me back from the OST, and I raised the issue again. I tried to appeal to reason, concluding that if I began work immediately, I would have equal time to produce the Doom Eternal OST as I did for the Doom 2016 OST. So he's like, okay, I can start work right now, and I can pump out something of the same quality as the last game, and if I just start immediately. I didn't receive a reply. Just silence. Now, once the game came out, something else very interesting came to light to Mick. You know all that music that had been rejected by id Software? Yeah, turns out they didn't actually reject it. They said they rejected it so that he could write more minutes, but they actually secretly kept it. And they used all of it. They used all of the music he wrote for them. Double the amount he was contracted to write. And they used all of it. And he was paid for half. And he starts to realize that them rejecting all of that music he sent to them, and just so haphazardly, like rejecting stuff they'd already accepted, which didn't make any sense. It was all a plot. It was all a little scheme. Basically, they'd signed a contract for 142 minutes, and as the game's development wore on, they realized, as the scope just totally blew up, that 142 minutes was not nearly enough. And instead of renegotiating some kind of contract thing to pay for more minutes, to, let's say double the amount of time, amount of minutes they were going to order from him to fit the scope of the game now, what if we just rejected the music he gives us, and then he has to write new music, and then we secretly keep the stuff that we said we rejected. And then we'll just use all of it, and we don't have to pay him more. Now, I feel like I shouldn't have to tell you that this is supremely illegal. It is obscenely illegal, and in fact, this is the thing that contracts exist for. It's so that this doesn't happen, that you get it in writing. So, they just did something illegal and hoped that they wouldn't get caught. Unbelievable. Here we get to the rest of the OST saga. So at the beginning of 2020, they had been taking pre-order sales for 6 months. No OST deal. No contract. No response when he even tries to bring it up. And he's getting nervous. Because, hey guys, the game is going to come out soon. And we need to write a contract for this thing. The in-game score is done, so that distraction, quote-unquote, is done. So he decides, if it's not going to respond to me, I'm just going to go to Bethesda. And he has the screenshot of the email he sent to the Bethesda higher-ups. And it says, I was hoping we could chat about a soundtrack for Doom Eternal. I've raised the topic of a soundtrack discuss with the id Software team numerous times ever since it was announced at E3 2019, but my attempts haven't been met with much enthusiasm. As release is only a few short months away, I wanted to reach out to you directly to see if we could get this thing off the ground. I'd really love to pour some time and energy into a soundtrack release that is worthy of the Doom name, and we still have time to make it an awesome release. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'm more than happy to jump on a call to talk it through if that's easier. Really hoping we can do something great with this one. And apparently Bethesda gets back to him pretty fast. And they're like, yeah, we'll write up a contract for the OST. Probably because they sort of put the pieces together that when he lays it out next to them, you announced it and there's no contract. I imagine they were like, hey, let's get something in writing. So he sends a demand for a contract for like basically they start working the contract negotiations. Bethesda agreed to pay for the album, but insisted. Oh, okay. So this was something that had happened in 2019. This was, remember how I said that he had gotten screwed over on a game OST that he was never under contract for? That game came out in 2019. October of 2019. So it's around this time that he really wants to get fucking paid for that. So, in the same discussion, he asks if they can, like, hey, can I get paid for that? And they say, sure, but can we consolidate it into the Eternal OST contract? So we'll pay you for both. Excuse me. Excuse me. So we'll pay you for both, but it's going to be in one contract. So there's a whole section on the negotiations. He says that he wanted the album to be similar to the Doom 2016 OST, a comprehensive album of 30 tracks and a runtime of over 2 hours. Marty would later claim that this was the agreed deal, but that is entirely false. In fact, the suggestion was shot down within a matter of hours because it was evident to me and everyone else actually involved in the discussions that there simply wasn't enough time or budget to make it work. So instead of a full 30-track album, they settle on 12 songs. 12 songs is enough. Okay, it's doable. On March 7th, 2 weeks before the game's release, Bethesda sent me draft terms for my review. The terms stated, I would produce 12 songs for inclusion in the OST. All 12 songs were selected by id Software. id Software had final approval. I was required to hand over all my source files such as stems, raw assets, mix sessions, etc. And the deadline is April 16th. Bethesda told me that the April 16th deadline was ideal, but if I needed more time, they would be happy to amend the contract later. The deadline was therefore considered flexible, but as an incentive, they offered a bonus if I finished by April 16th. So, hey, no biggies, we're gonna work with you. Bethesda's being actually quite nice here. They also assured me the contract would include payment for the other OST I produced in 2015. Next section. The OST was delayed before I had a contract. So, March 7th, they send him the terms for the contract. They haven't signed the contract yet. It hasn't been finalized. But they send him the terms. March 11th, only a few days later, they announced that the album wouldn't be out on March 20th as promised. No new release date was given because there wasn't one. I still hadn't received the contract. It's just the terms. ZeniMax sent me the agreement on March 18th, just 48 hours before the game's release. Marty would later claim the agreement was finalized in January, implying I was under contract for a much longer period. That is a lie. And he has an attached screenshot of the email which was sent out on March 18th. So he has 29 days to write to make 12 songs for this OST. I agreed to the terms and all parties. There's a little bit of foreshadowing. I couldn't see any obvious warning signs that things would derail so terribly. So he agrees. And he's like, okay, 4 weeks of just, we're going to put our nose to the grindstone. So he gets no direction from id about the actual content of the OST. He's just, it's all him. It's all him making all the decisions. So he starts putting together something that he thinks is going to work. So he said, actually, when he's on his own, making his own decisions and he knows what to do, went pretty smoothly, according to him. He finished half the album after 2 weeks. Hey, not bad. Okay, he's on schedule. Then on April 3rd, 13 days before the deadline, I received an email from Marty Stratton. So Marty's email stated, contrary to what Bethesda had told me, that the April 16th date was now absolutely necessary. And that's because there were consumer protection laws in some territories that meant anyone who purchased the collector's edition was entitled to a full refund if they didn't receive the OST by the 20th. So there were regional laws where people could get full refunds on their pre-orders if it's not ready by the date they said it would be. It dawned on me that I was being threatened. Refunds meant financial losses. Marty was saying, in his view, that I was legally liable for any loss id Software suffered due to customers claiming refunds over a late OST. If it wasn't ready in 13 days, they would come after me. I did the numbers in my head, and the thought was terrifying. I couldn't understand why Marty hadn't told me sooner. If I had been made aware of the consumer protection issue before signing the contract, I would have refused to do the OST. And he suspects that that was intentional, that they'd known about this, and they had chosen not to tell him, probably because no sane person would take on that incredible risk. But they basically put him in another fuck yous type of situation. Here's where it gets funny. So Marty reveals that they had gotten their lead audio designer Chad Mossholder to make an alternative OST by cutting together songs using edited chunks of the in-game score. So Mick is like, okay, I get it. Maybe we can work together on this. Marty doesn't say anything. Chad Mosswood contacts him and says that his album of just edits was almost complete. He sends it over for Mick to review, just to hear it. And it was 70 tracks. It was 70 tracks. And it's fucked up. So first of all, he had been, based on metadata from the audio files, these had been he'd started work on these as far back as August 2019, 6 months before Mick Gordon got the OST contract. So they were gearing up for Mick being unable to do it. So he's got the receipts, he's got the documents. So he actually listens to the edits, and they're fucking bad. Completely not up to professional standards. Clicks. So eyeballed. The edits had been eyeballed in a slap. He's basically just taking random bits of audio and songs, just putting them together. Not even putting a basic crossfade to make them fade into each other. All these different sections. Sometimes just layering two different songs on top of each other. It isn't mixed properly. There's clicks, there's popping, there's clipping, weird tempo changes, weird gaps, weird transitions. He says some quote-unquote songs were just seamless loop files ripped directly from the game's Wowise package. So, some of them aren't even edits. They're just the game looping. When you go on YouTube and you search for, extended OST, it was that. It was just that. It wasn't a hand-crafted album song of making an actual song out of it. So he's like, what? This is really bad. And they're still putting his name on it. So he has 8 days. And he does not have time to fix Chad's OST. So he just tries to finish his OST. So he finished this Easter weekend. So he doesn't get time to spend with his family. No, he doesn't get to have Easter dinner or anything. He's crunching 18 to 20 hour days and sleeping under his desk. He has to get this done or they're going to sue his ass to the moon. So the deadline's there. He sends it over. There is a issue where a computer issue had halted progress. He needed 4 to 5 hours to fix it and bounce the final track. So essentially just, okay, there's a little technical error in the 11th hour. Give me 4 hours or something and I'll fix it. Marty is not happy. He demanded an urgent group call across 3 different time zones to tell everyone he didn't want these 10 songs. He actually wanted other songs. And Mick is staring at him like, what the fuck? What the fuck, dude? Despite ample time, Marty hadn't given me any direction on the OST whatsoever, but now at the absolute last possible minute, he actually wanted to do something about it. Mick says he shot back that their rapidly crunching schedule and imminent deadline meant it was too late for a change in direction, and that I'd prefer to use the little time remaining to work on the music rather than entertain his sudden, last-minute interest in the OST. Marty says they're going to release Chad's version instead. He told me to hand over my tracks, and Chad would assemble the final OST. And he can't do anything about it because Marty has final veto power and complete creative control. And he's like, okay, you know, Chad's stuff is kind of bad, but I'll give you the files. I'm kind of worried. And then he just kind of waits. He gets paid on time, including the bonus he got for being on time with the deadline. And according to him, got paid for that other OST. So that was taken care of, thanks to Bethesda. He never got to hear the actual finished version of the album. So the OST comes out and it's fucked up. It's fucked up. Alongside his, so he says that alongside my direct contributions were an additional 47 tracks made by poorly editing together bits and pieces taken from my in-game score. They exhibited the same thoughtless disregard for basic music fundamentals that plagued the preliminary edits id Software showed me a week earlier. But in some cases, they'd actually been made worse. Just like complete sloppy mess. I was stunned at the ineptitude and couldn't believe what I was hearing. Track after track was full of real, obvious technical faults, mistakes, and errors resulting from careless editing. And he has a couple examples of why, and just like baffling decisions with a link to like track 24 with a clear like popping, and how there's just 2 songs that are not in the same time signature. Just a mess. And his name was on them. And not only is his name on this album, Chad is co-credited. Oh, thank God. And he kind of digs into Chad a bit. Chad didn't write, arrange, perform, record, or produce any of this music. He carried out a copy-paste job, cutting apart finished music and resaving it. For this, the proper credit would be considered music editor. Yet in some cases, such as Erdak, track 8, and Diag Renak, track 15, he did nothing but change the file name. So some of them were actually mixed tracks. And Chad didn't change anything about them except for what the title of the name was, and he gets put down as a composer. And a lot of this music, hours of rejected demos that he was not paid for. So there's tracks, like he says, like track 59 was a rough idea mocked up in haste for the ending cutscene. This exact demo file was immediately rejected. In fact, Chad was part of the panel that rejected it, but he included the file on the album and listed himself as a co-artist, despite having absolutely nothing to do with it. More importantly, the song is based on a melody written by Bobby Prince. Yeah, it's called Final Sin Sandy City, which is based off of Into Sandy City, classic Doom track by Bobby Prince, who is not credited anywhere. There's actually a clip of Mick talking about that, how he came up with that idea, and it's like the final cutscene of the game where the Doomslayer is like walking into the burning city, and he was like, and Mick is like sees this cutscene and he has this idea and he's like, oh, this would be a perfect spot to reference Into Sandy City. And he puts together like this little synth thing of the original melody, and then he lays over these like super heavy guitars. And it's like a fucking perfect idea. And it's so cool in game. Wasn't paid for it. In fact, it was rejected immediately. So the OST is a disaster. And Mick says nothing. Mick says nothing besides besides just saying that, like, I mixed this song, I didn't mix these songs. That's pretty much as much as he says. And Marty's upset. And he says, why aren't you supporting the OST? It's giving us bad press. Here's another running theme of Marty Stratton using bad publicity that's his fault as a way to pin the blame on someone else who was not at fault. There's a funny... He basically says he wanted a joint statement that affirmed our commitment to doing something about it. Here's a funny quote. Marty can overwhelm you with the power of his disappointment. So they have this call, and Marty seems kind of diplomatic. And he says, we want to do what's best for all. And Mick takes his word for it. This is actually before the call. Oh yeah, so this is before the call. This was just over like Skype chat. As soon as the call starts, he writes down the quote, "Frankly, we're too fucking nice." And Marty just chews him out and just like, you're such a fucking, my God. And like, why are you attacking? And like, Mick is just saying like, okay, here's the problems that I had. And Marty's like, you're attacking us. You're making an attack. And I'm just trying to protect us. And threatening him with legal action. He put across the view that the act of me signing the contract had absolved him of any prior mismanagement that led to the situation in the first place. He accused me of lying when I told him about the email I received from Bethesda that contradicted him on the importance of the deadline. I forwarded him the email, but he ignored it. Seeming to forget I only received the contract 2 days before the game released, Marty rejected my assertion, quote-unquote, that id Software is always, quote, rushing things, and expressed frustration at the, quote, notion out in the public that they didn't afford me enough time to produce a better album. What a shithead. So they have an argument where he's like, why did you do that? And he's like, I didn't. You did that. And Marty's just pushing the blame and saying that Mick needs to take full responsibility for how the OST came out. Mick finally agrees, okay, we'll have a joint statement about it, and we're going to figure out what we're going to do. Marty, before the call is over, says that he would send Mick a draft of that statement the following morning. That draft never comes, and in fact, Marty makes a post on Reddit, on r/Doom. Now, that's weird because official statements were not usually given on the Doom subreddit. It's not official. It's run by it's just run by fans. There are companies like the Hololive subreddit it used to be fan run and is now technically official. It has like fan moderators, but it's like there will be official announcements made on there from company representatives. That's not the way that the Doom subreddit works. And Marty had not made a Reddit post in 3 years. So he takes to Reddit to write this whole post about how Mick is such a lazy artist and just he was so difficult to work with and all this stuff. And Mick sees this and is just dumbfounded. He says he couldn't believe what he was reading. He's like, we just agreed to a joint statement. This is like, you're going to see, this is the point where Marty Stratton goes from incompetent to like evil. Like actual evil. Like he just lied to him and writes this whole post absolving himself of any fault, pins it all on Mick, completely misrepresents what kind of an artist Mick is to work with. Like if you've ever seen any documentaries or anything, like there's a KI documentary where they're talking about like the behind the scenes, or the Killer Instinct like behind the scenes, where Mick Gordon's talking about his composition process, and like the dude cares so much. He's the type of guy you want on your project because he's so dedicated. Stratton completely misrepresents him, and in such a way where it could actually discourage future employers from wanting to work with him because it paints him in such a negative light. And this is like spiteful. This is straight up. He said they would make a joint statement, never follows up, writes straight up lies. He just lies. And you know what that results in? Mick Gordon starts getting disgusting hate mail. Just, let's see if there's a section. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, incidences of online abuse escalated at an alarming rate as Marty's Reddit post led to frustration over my alleged professional failure, and toxic gamers grew openly aggressive. They shared my personal details via message boards, including Reddit, which meant that the abusers could now reach me in more ways than ever. They email bombed my inboxes, crashing the server and clogging my messaging services, crippling my ability to communicate. They harassed my other clients with attempts to get me fired from their projects. They called my phone numbers around the clock, screaming messages full of abuse. I began receiving specific expressions of violence, the content so vivid it made me sick, the torrent of abuse, telling me how to kill myself, how I'd be mutilated, how they would circulate photos of my body to traumatize my family, how my family would be murdered, how they'd hurt my animals, how they'd shoot up any event I attended, how I'd be raped to death, really started to wear me down in ways I couldn't previously imagine. Thanks, Marty. Thanks, Marty. Because he just lied. He just lied. Okay. So, as soon as the Reddit post goes live, Mick contacts his lawyers. The lawyers send complaints to id. Marty forwards the complaints to ZeniMax. ZeniMax assumed that Marty had acted appropriately and denied needing to pay me for the additional music. And Mick goes, "Oh, really?" And he gives all the documents. All the documents, including the contracts, the dates and times, emails, phone calls, text messages. And once he presents all those details, and the breakdown of how much music was in the actual game versus how much he was contracted to produce, they go, "I think we can settle." Settlement offer negotiations. So Mick has some specific demands. Number 1, payment. Number 2, Marty takes down the Reddit post. It's libel. It's straight up libel. They rejected this on Marty's concern that if he admitted fault publicly, that would negatively affect his reputation. I want to rip Marty Stratton's head off. Instead, they proposed a deal. They would pay me the money owed, but on the condition I produce a new, polished version of the Doom Eternal OST, appearing to suggest that if I gave them something to sell, that would somehow make up for the damage Marty had caused to my reputation. And Mick is like he's trying to figure out how to navigate this, because he obviously he needs him to take the Reddit post down. It's libel. It's illegal. And basically there is just, so Mick basically puts his foot down and he says, my acceptance of your settlement offer is tied to the condition that Marty removes the post immediately. And then it goes from being, oh, we're trying to work this out, to, you're gonna have to watch out, bucko, type of thing. Their mood suddenly changed, and a threatening tone edged their letter of response. They withdrew the settlement offer and vowed the Reddit post was just the beginning. Marty was willing to issue legal proceedings to use the court process to damage my reputation further. They threatened legal action over the times I had discussed Doom Eternal publicly, forcing me to remove my YouTube streams, and for using Doom Eternal on my portfolio, meaning I cannot share any of the music I produced for the game, and I had to remove any mention of Doom Eternal from my website. The letter then devolved into a bizarre rant that attempted to frame Marty's behavior not as wrongdoing, but instead as something I deserved. He's insane. This guy is insane. But contrarily, the same letter presented me with a new settlement for damages caused anyway. So essentially they offer him hush money if he never speaks about the game or the soundtrack again. Nothing else. That's it. It's just we give you the money and you never speak again. This next section's called Go to Hell. So he says, fuck no, I'm not, fuck you guys. The truth is more important. I worked incredibly hard on the franchise, crunching for years to make it happen. My scores for both games were very successful. The companies who released them enjoyed the benefits. To have all that thrown away by someone who blatantly lied, to portray me as a person who brings uncertainty and risk, quote-unquote, to any project, who now wanted to pay me off to preserve his reputation, was both troubling and hurtful. So he rejects the gag order, and he's like, no. And this leads to the classic runaround. The classic delays and reschedulings. And we can't have the meeting now. Someone's on vacation. For months. Long enough that it goes into ZeniMax getting bought by Microsoft. Marty's company had gotten to the point of offering to pay me off instead of addressing his inability to take responsibility for his behavior, and toxic gamers were using his false accusations as a license to target me with relentless abuse, public shaming, and violent rhetoric. All this over a video game soundtrack. The absurdity of it all wasn't lost on me. So, Mick comes up with another proposal, perhaps a compromise. He would produce a better version of the Doom Eternal OST. But in return, Marty has to take down the Reddit post, publish a clarification, and he gets payment for all the music he wasn't paid for. More stalling ensues. More stalling. More stalling. More stalling. So Mick goes, that was a personal account that he posted that on. What if I just, and Reddit's it's not a government body. Technically, this is a thing when I hear people talk about freedom of speech on like the internet, on like social media sites, it's like, that's not what the freedom of speech is, to protect you from the government, not like companies. Like, that's a different thing. So he reaches out to a Reddit mod, and he gives, they have a call on Discord. They hit it off, and he explains, what happened. He provides the evidence, and the mod goes, oh, whoa, no idea. Holy shit. No one knew it was this bad. Immediately takes the post down. Mick's like, all right. 12 hours later, the post came back. The moderator blocked him on Discord and didn't reply to his emails. A few days later, Marty's lawyers contacted me and said removing the Reddit post had greatly offended him. He was furious and made it clear in the strongest terms that an amicable resolution would be impossible. So basically, Mick gets into the purpose of the statement. He basically says that he's in a position where he can only, he has to take it public. He's taken every possible private route to come to some kind of an agreement. And because Marty Stratton is fucking insane. Okay, here's one of the things that really blew my mind. So, let's see. Where is it? So I believe there's a part in the Reddit post where Marty says something to the effect of, the score is fantastic and Mick should get all the awards for it. Well, it turns out Mick has never gotten an award for the soundtrack. Oh, he's been, they've gone to him, they're in his name, but he doesn't have them. Id never, where's the, let's get this. So I fucking remember it. So Mick Gordon got several awards for his soundtrack, right? He was, brought by the Game Awards, not by id. The Game Awards paid for him to go perform at the Game Awards when he was awarded. But at no other point did id even offer to bring him to accept an award. Mick Gordon has never accepted an award for Doom Eternal. He couldn't show up, That was the story. He couldn't show up. You know who did accept the rewards in his place? Marty Stratton. And they're in a glass case in the id Software headquarters. And Mick Gordon has never seen them. And this is the point where you go from, when I said, that's the thing that seals it, where Marty Stratton isn't just an asshole. He's, evil. That's, a level of spite and, fucking hatred I can't even imagine feeling for someone who has done nothing wrong. For your mistakes. Unbridled. He must hate Mick Gordon's fucking guts to have done even half the shit he's done to him. He's an evil fucking person. There's a section towards the end, which is a point-by-point response to the Reddit post. And if you want a detailed response to that, it's obviously in the table of contents. There's a section called the most hurtful lie. In a grubby move, and without proof, Marty alleged I instigated a campaign of harassment targeting id Software employees. In a baseless claim that is a total lie, he directly accused me of making statements that, quote, led some to vilify and attack an id employee. This outrageous accusation, used as the rationale for his Reddit post, was designed to undermine my character and provoke a strong emotional response. Later, this horrid, ill-founded allegation prompted lawyers acting on Marty's behalf to offer me a 6-figure settlement to cover damages. So they're willing to pay. It's just a lie. So mind you, Mick Gordon, didn't say fucking anything. Maybe he assumed he was talking about Chad, but the article is the first time he's even said Chad's name in writing, like in public. There's a quite there's a very biting sentence where he says, frankly, using the guise of staff safety as an excuse to attack someone on Reddit is fucking disgusting. I think it's the only curse word in the article, and it hits hard. Yeah. So he ends this whole thing, this gigantic read, with saying, in issuing this statement, I'm exercising my right to defend myself. Because Marty seems to imply any kind of criticism as a direct attack on him as a person. Or any kind of it's a pattern with him. Every time there's a concern brought up, it's an attack. Oh, I'm going to tell you what, I'm really hungry. I'm really hungry. But I do want to give some closing thoughts before I go make some food and start rendering this thing out. I feel like it should be obvious. There were people obviously drawing comparisons to the Helena Taylor thing that happened recently. And that's understandable. It's a similar kind of dynamic, but this is different. This is really different. Helena Taylor's statement was her talking to a camera for all of, 4 minutes. No proof, no evidence, no nothing. And half of that statement was her quoting the Bible. Really weird. Mick Gordon, this is very different. People say, we need to listen to both sides. This is the other side. Marty had his side. This is Mick Gordon's side. And Mick comes with enough evidence in terms of screenshots, in terms of emails, and claims that are strong enough that, if he's lying about any of this, it would be pretty bad. Which is probably why he's written it under the advice of his legal team. I believe pretty much everything in here because Marty sounds like a person who could exist. There's nothing with the Bayonetta thing, it was it didn't really add up. Even in the initial story, it was there has to be something else here because it doesn't make any. It wasn't a payment thing. It couldn't have been a budget thing. Couldn't have been a union thing. There had to have been some kind of personal issue happening that soured that relationship. So immediately, even though I took Helena's side, to be honest, immediately I was I'll say I wasn't 100% on her side, but I was leaning more towards her because Kamiya's response and all that was really terrible. And but there was a question, I would like to know some more details about what happened. This is Marty strikes me as that kind of The kind of manager who gets into his position cares more about his reputation than the product or his employees or the people he's working with. And his values are so misaligned that preserving his basically saving face is more important. He will go to the ends of the earth to do it. Like, I don't know if narcissism or egomania or what falls under it. I'm not a psychologist, but it hits me that way. It's got shades of that. I wouldn't be surprised if he could be diagnosed with one of those. It's just the blame deflecting as well. The blame, there's incompetence, and then there's blame deflecting to pin it onto Mick. And then throughout so much of the process, not just to like pin it on Mick's failure, but to make it this kind of moral thing. Like the way he describes that letter where it makes it seem like he deserves this punishment is fucking bizarre. It's so weird. And I can sit here and say that he should sue them. But like, I don't know, I don't know the ins and outs, the intricacies of what's going on. It would be a big headache. I mean, Mick Gordon lives in Australia. I imagine he's probably has some kind of Australian citizenship. Id's in America, like fucking flying all the way across the world for a court case that could go for a fucking while, like these things would. And, he's already been through so much. I can't say what I would do. All I can say is that for right now, because the story's been out for a while and there's been nothing to really refute it or bring up anything weird with it. It's just kind of been there. For now, I'm in Mick's corner. He has the track record that I think he's a reputable person. I think he's a trustworthy. He's displayed some amount of like a really intense amount of passion, I should say. And I think that like too many things add up. Too many things add up. When you look at how the OST came out, when you look at the business, when you look at like the documents he provided, I genuinely, unfortunately, think that he got fucked over royally by this guy's utter egomania and narcissism. And I hope that this is the catalyst for something happening. There's obviously the question of like people feeling bad for supporting Doom or Doom Eternal or something like that, and I guess I would say that like you can do what you want. It's up to you. If I had to make any kind of demand, what I would want to see as a consumer is, personally, I don't want to buy anything Marty Stratton has worked on. I don't want him to get money for it. And I don't want it to reflect well on him. Because it seems like whatever is good about the game is not because of him. In fact, it's sounds more like the good parts of the game are in spite of him. And morally, as a consumer, ethically as a consumer, I don't want to support someone like that. I would be comfortable if he got let go. Just speaking personally, I think a lot of other people would too. God bless Mick. Fuck Marty Stratton. It's really unfortunate. I hope everything works out for Mick. He seems like a good guy, and it's really difficult to read that article. It's very frustrating. And I didn't even live through it. And with that, I'm gonna call this to a close. What do I say? Patreon. I'm working on the next main channel video. I want to do a stream for the 2-year anniversary. I want to do it. It's going to be on November 17th in a couple days. I want to do a stream. I'm probably going to like play some Plus R or something, and we'll celebrate that way. Check out the main channel. Check out the Patreon. If you have a question, leave it down in the comments below, but please phrase it in the form of a question. Excuse me, I don't just want to read your thoughts out loud. I'm hungry. And I'm out.